who don't follow the script. Tonight we have broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford, director of the Common Sense Society Emma Webb, and former Labour MP Simon Danczuk. And tonight I'll be asking the pundits what first attracted Tony Blair to the oil-rich state of Saudi Arabia. Do we need a nationwide DNA database for crime, or is it overstepping the line? And should Pride events be funded by the taxpayer after the revelations that £500,000 was spent on Pride events this year? Plus your emails, send them in to gbviews@gbnews.com. This show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's get to work, and we start with my big opinion. It was the glorious 12th yesterday, the start of the British grouse shooting season. Grouse moors rang with the crack of shotguns as landed gentry leaned out of their butts to shoot these fast, nimble birds. Restaurants rushed to serve the first delicious grouse of the season, a fine tradition, but now the metropolitan elite have hunting and shooting in their crosshairs. Legislation has been passed, the Wildlife Management Bill, that could criminalise grouse shooting. Cosseted metropolitan elites castigate shooting as inhumane and immoral, and Green politicians say that grouse shooting is bad for the environment. This is absolute balderdash. Grouse moors are carefully managed to provide habitat for the grouse, and it's also habitat for all kinds of rare flora and fauna, such as curlew, merlin, large heath butterflies and orchids. More than 2/3 of England's grouse moors are designated as sites of special scientific interest. Burning the heather to stimulate fresh growth for grouse to eat, which is criticised as endangering wildlife and releasing carbon, actually prevents wildfires and promotes biodiversity. If it wasn't for grouse shooting, then the grouse moors, these oases of biodiversity, wouldn't exist. The chattering classes in Islington don't realise this, but the countryside is a business. Land has to provide money and employment. If this moorland wasn't used for grouse shooting, it would be used for the next most lucrative use, which in most cases is blanket coniferous forestry. This industrial forestry is non-indigenous and creates a monoculture where nothing thrives but pine trees and midges. Blanket forestry doesn't support the ecological diversity found in a grouse moor. It acidifies the soil and water courses, upsetting the delicate balance of nature for miles around. It's the rural equivalent of an oil spill. And grouse moors provide essential employment for some of the most deprived communities in Britain, remote rural areas and former mining towns. My father was a gunsmith on the Scottish grouse moors at Lead Hills, fixing the guns of the toffs shooting the grouse. And my first job, age 14, was as a grouse beater. It's not as violent as it sounds. Grouse beaters aren't paid to rough up the grouse a bit before they're shot. No, I was one of the men who walk in a line across the moor waving a flag. And there's me, age 14, after I'd shot my first grouse. I hadn't paid for it, by the way. It was a freebie. Grouse beating got me and these other men out of the house, gave us a hard day's work and a bit of extra cash to top up our gyros, as well as seasonal work for beaters and loaders. Skilled local workers are employed all year round, and local businesses such as hotels and restaurants also benefit. Huge amounts of public money have been pumped into these deprived communities to offset the decline of farming and the end of coal mining, but grouse shooting does a far better job of generating jobs and wealth in these isolated areas than government handouts ever could do. But lefties say grouse shooting is inhumane, it's unnecessary suffering. It does, after all, revolve around blasting animals out of the sky. But compared to factory-farmed animals such as chickens, which lead a short, unpleasant life in a concrete shed, crammed up against other chickens, pumped full of antibiotics, before they're strapped by the feet to a conveyor belt of a machine that electrocutes them and boils them and plucks them, grouse lead an enviably pleasant and natural life. Grouse live as nature intended, on the moors, eating wild heather, free to roam and nest wherever they please. Some are then quickly killed and eaten. Humans have been killing animals to eat since the dawn of time. And as a shooter myself, there's nothing more respectful than killing your own food instead of outsourcing it to a disinterested grunt in an abattoir. Unless politicians are going to force us all to become vegan and live in biosustainable teepees, they have no right to stop people shooting grouse. All right, I'm here. I always forget about that bit. Oh my God, it's my daily exercise. Anyway, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with me? Email gbviews@gbnews.com, and I'll get to your emails after the break. Reacting to my big opinion tonight are my brilliant panel of broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford, director for the Common Sense Society Emma Webb, and former Labour MP Simon Danksuck. Am I pronouncing that right?
That's fine, is that? Yeah, I can live with that. Right. I've been called worse.
I mean, what do you make of it? Are any of you hunters and shooters yourselves?
No, but I'm with you on it. I don't think we should be banning shooting grouse at all. And I think it's the thin end of a wedge. And I'm worried that people who are campaigning on these issues ultimately want to get us to become vegetarian or vegan, and that's the end point. And so it's the thin end of a wedge. That's what I would argue.
Yeah. It's controlling people's lives, and it's also shutting down part of the economy that's self-sustaining and part of the free market, and leaving people dependent on government handouts.
I feel very conflicted because I am a member of the RSPB and I don't agree with murdering birds, but I'm also a country girl. I grew up in the country, and this is, as you say, a thriving economy that actually for a lot of the beaters, it's not just a community, it's the way in which they earn their livelihoods for whatever it is, 4 to 5 months of the year. And if you took that away, not only would you really decimate those communities, both economically, but also mentally, spiritually, but from a conservation point of view, actually the way in which those grouse moors are processed and dealt with in different seasons, it is actually encouraging the biodiversity. And you see that a lot in other continents, in Africa in particular, where the regeneration is allowed to happen naturally. This is the regeneration that is man-made, but they're doing it with great, hundreds of years of knowledge about how to actually improve the land under their care.
And absolutely. The same actually happened with fox hunting. So there's some evidence to suggest that actually, under the current circumstances, the fox population is less healthy because we got rid of traditional fox hunting. So I think the point about biodiversity is really important, because if you're talking about outcomes and you're talking, you actually care about animals and you actually care about the countryside and you want it to flourish, you should care about biodiversity. And seeing human beings as if we are somehow outside of that, I think, is part of the problem. We are part of that ecosystem. There's nothing wrong or immoral about shooting birds, aside from the fact that I love shooting. I've never shot birds before, but I'd quite like to go on a grouse hunt if they don't get rid of it. But I think that's what's really important, that if as I do, if you really love animals and you really love the countryside, you should want their populations to thrive in all of that biodiversity. And real conservation, I think when you go and you speak to people, farmers in the countryside, they have a very, very different opinion on this to, like you were saying, the sort of metropolitan elite who have absolutely no idea how... And Clarkson's farm was a perfect example of this. And I think that actually, if people actually listened to what small farmers' lives are actually like, and paid attention to their understanding of protecting biodiversity, they'd take a very different approach. Yeah, they're the custodians of the land. We've actually got some comments from viewers. John says, the only grouse you know is the whiskey. That is racially stereotyping me because of my accent, but it is very true. Gam says, famous grouse is the best. I see a theme developing here. It's Sunday night, people are settling down for a tipple. Tim says, metropolitans should get out more. And I think that's a great point. And the grouse moors, I've always found them absolutely beautiful, great for hiking on. Whereas blanket coniferous forestry, especially when it's felled, it looks like a scene for the Somme when all the trees are felled. But also you were mentioning curlews. So down where I come from in West Sussex, there's a huge shortage of curlews, and that actually what we really need to do is to encourage areas where they can thrive and improve their natural habitat. So there would be an amazing sense in which you could migrate them from grouse moors to other parts of the country. But if they're not doing it on the grouse moors, who else is going to be saving the curlew? Yeah, and I think they migrate themselves because they go out in the mud flats and eat the stuff there as well. But yeah,
mean, I've noticed that, you know, hunters and shooters, they look after the land so that the animals that they want to shoot can survive on there.
Yeah, the problem is there is this very thin layer of corporate hospitality where you've got people who only shoot once every 4 years because they've been invited by some, you know, investment banker, and I speak as a former investment banker, so I know whereof I speak, that actually these people, they do it because they think it's the thing to do, and they buy all the kit and they buy the gun, and then they only shoot once. And I think the myth is to think that everybody who's involved in shooting is that kind of individual, and that's just not the case.
But it's the same with anything. With football, you've got the corporate boxes where, you know, they're probably full of people who've got no interest in football. But just, you know,
what's wrong with it? It's traditional.
Yeah.
Like, it's an English pastime.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Why are we as a country more prone to getting rid of stuff like that? When you go to France or Spain, they keep these traditions for donkeys.
Well, they wouldn't have any of it.
They wouldn't have any of it.
But that's because I think there's such a disconnect now between the town and the country.
Yes.
That actually you've got a massive divide in this country where you've got children who grow up who don't know where milk comes from, and you have fantastic farms like the City Farm in London.
Combined with a kind of arrogance.
Is the thing. I mean, we're seeing people, because I mean, you mentioned that, you know, they're murdering the birds. I mean, I don't know. I know you're sort of embellishing it, but I mean, I don't know if you're...
I think the birds die, and they die a bloody death.
Well, are you a vegetarian yourself?
No, I'm not actually.
So you're not a vegetarian, so you're happy to outsource the murder to somebody in a slaughterhouse?
I think there's a technical term for it.
Pescatarian.
Pescatarian.
Somebody who
which just
murders
sounds so
fish is how I
ridiculous.
describe it.
But as a member, so I remember the RSPB, and it just goes again. You know, I've got my little bird feeder on the window and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I feel, you know, deep affinity with birds.
But not with fish, which are happy to be murdered. Just
Exactly.
there's a nice comment here. Graham, geez, Leo, you were an ugly kid. Fortunately...
An honest viewer.
Yeah, fortunately you grew into a handsome man. Thank goodness you got out of Scotland in time. I mean, he's got a point. When I was 14, I did somehow manage to look like Nicholas Lyndhurst with progeria. But I mean, I think there is this disconnect between urban centres, and like you say, you know, people don't know where milk comes from, and you know, so people don't understand that the chunks of flesh that they buy in the supermarket come from an animal.
But it's the arrogance too. It's the people in the cities and in urban areas, particularly the liberal metropolitan elite, lecturing people in the countryside as if the people in the countryside don't love animals and don't love the environment and actually don't know best, when they have no experience of it whatsoever, so they have no idea what they're talking about, but they're too arrogant to actually listen.
Yeah, well, having lived in the countryside, I can tell you that some people love animals a little bit too much. Anyway, coming up next in the big story, 509 migrants crossed the Channel, and the same day 6 poor souls died trying to cross it, and the baby Stockholm is riddled with poisoned water. How useless are the government? Will this ever end? Stay tuned. See you in a couple of minutes.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
News Radio.
In tonight's big story, 509 migrants crossed the Channel the same day that 6 people tragically died trying to make the same journey. And earlier in the week, the Bibby Stockholm migrant barge was found to be full of diseases. It seems like the whole system is screwed. I'm joined by immigration lawyer Ivan Sampson to discuss our broken migration system. Hi, Ivan. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Good evening.
Have the Tories lost control, and how do you think we could fix the system?
I think, look, people say there's a huge asylum problem, but if you look over the last 20 years, we've had a fluctuation on the number of people claiming asylum. In 2001, when I was a young lawyer, we had 85,000 people in 1 year claiming asylum, significantly less than we have now. And there's a correlation between conflicts around the world and the number of people seeking asylum. So things will change. 10 years from now, we might have a totally different set of figures. With regard to your second part of the question is, how do we fix the system? I wonder if the Home Office wants to fix it. I wonder if, because every policy they've put forward has been in breach of either the Refugee Convention or the European Convention on Human Rights. It's not rocket science. Policies must comply with the law. Everything the government proposed does not comply with the law. And I wonder if the government, up to the election, they've got this one single policy is we can fix the asylum system. If they fix it before the election, what do they do then? I mean, what else are they going to try and win the election on? What other policies? So I wonder how much effort the government are putting in. Look, the low-lying fruit is 5 countries where the grant rate is in the 90%. Why isn't the government releasing the blockage in the system by quickly granting asylum to those nationals from those 5 countries?
But Ivan, I think it's because it's because we know that the system is being gamed. It's being fixed. People are fiddling the system. They're being coached by immigration lawyers, by NGOs, by charities in how to claim asylum. So you're told to say you're a Christian, for example. So you can't be sent back because you'll be persecuted. And I believe that's how the Liverpool maternity bomber managed to stay in the UK. They're told to say that they're gay, or they'll be tortured if they get sent back. So I mean, we've seen the revelations over the past few weeks of how the asylum system can be fiddled. And it seems unfair to blame the government for that system. Maybe it's that system that needs to be changed. And you know, the fact that we've got a high pass rate for the people who do claim asylum really shows that the system is wrong, rather than those are all deserving cases.
Well, I disagree with you, because the government, when it refuses asylum applications, it's the British courts which allow them afterwards. So it's actual judges who look at this evidence and judges who then allow the appeals. So, and I think it's around 35 or 40% success rate. when asylum applications are refused by the Home Office. So that's simply not true. Look.
But that's, I mean, you're saying the courts and the judges are making these decisions. They're making these decisions based on the law. And the law was set up with the best intention and with different circumstances. Now that people have worked out how to fiddle that system, and they're coming across the channel in these boats, and we can see from looking at them that we can see footage of them ripping up their passports so they can claim to be whatever age and from whatever country they want. We can see that they're primarily economic migrants.
Well, look, if we know that one of the problems is people pretending to be from other countries, then we've got to have processes and policies to weed them out. Who else is going to do it? You elect a government to come up with policies to do that. Now, if they're failing to do that.
The government has been trying to push through anything it can do to try and either dissuade people from making the crossing, so setting up the Bibi Stockholm barge, so at least they're not being put in a 4-star hotel that looks amazing on the TikTok adverts that the people traffickers use to sell their expensive cross-channel journeys. And they're trying to push through the Rwanda plan, but they're stymied at every point by lawyers, by European courts, by UK courts as well. I mean, it just feels that the government is hamstrung. It's stuck between the law and a hard place.
We're signed up to international treaties. That is our international treaty obligations. We cannot flout the law as a sophisticated society, a society which upholds the law. So if you don't like the law, change the law. But don't blame lawyers and judges for upholding the law. That's simply not right. No, look, it's a global problem, needs a global solution. And the UNCHR needs to get involved. We need an addendum to the Refugee Convention to say what happens to asylum seekers once they claim asylum. Who takes them? Take Turkey has 3 million asylum seekers. Jordan has 1.5 million. Pakistan over 1 million. We are 17th on the League of European countries on the number of asylum seekers we take. So we actually don't take enough. That's
not entirely fair, because people should claim asylum in the first safe place that they can. And I think somebody coming from far afield, from the Middle East, the values, the culture that they bring with them might not mesh perfectly with a Western liberal democracy. The attitudes to women, to homosexuals, and we've seen in the past the issues that this has caused. And with people with ideologies, violent medieval ideologies that want to cause harm. For example, the Liverpool maternity hospital bomber that I mentioned earlier, he was claiming asylum in the UK. Although Turkey does take a lot more asylum seekers than the UK, I'm sure we'd take a lot more if they were from France, from Spain, from places that are nearby and culturally similar.
Well, look, the Refugee Convention, first of all, you don't have to seek asylum in the first country that you go to. That's the law. So if you want to comply with the law, then, you mustn't raise these issues. If you want to flout the law and say, well, you know what, we're going to break the Refugee Convention, we're not going to abide by what it says, and we're going to send them back from where they came from. That's fine. You can do that. And while we were in the EU, we had a treaty which allowed us to do that, the Dublin Convention. Since we came out the EU, we can no longer do that. So if you want to just push back boats, which is what Australia did under what's called Operation Sapphire, which is what the government's blueprint's on, is they're copying the Australians.
Which worked very well. It was very effective.
Yeah, we can push the boats back. The French push them back towards us. We push them back. And where does it end? You need to have treaties with other countries, and this is an international problem which needs an international solution. The EU are coming up with a new asylum plan. We should be part of that.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. And Ivan, thank you so much for joining us. This is Ivan Sampson, immigration lawyer, and some very interesting points about how we might have to change the law to deal with this issue. Well, there's more still to come, but first, the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain coming up through the next 24 hours, could be heavy at times, but the good news is that it does start to turn drier by the middle of the week. Low pressure in charge at the moment, but that moves out the way as we head towards Wednesday and high pressure replaces it, settling our weather down. This evening we have outbreaks of heavy rain pushing in across the West Country, Wales, spreading north and eastwards as we move through into the early hours. This turning heavy at times over parts of northern Wales, northern England, and Met Office warning in force here. Clearer skies for Northern Ireland, Scotland, some showery rain in places, and temperatures generally remaining in double figures. So wet start across England and Wales Monday morning. Heavy rain across Transpennines routes in particular if you're travelling here. Rain heavy as well across parts of Wales, just slowly pushing eastwards through the day. Sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Again, some of these heavy at times too. And temperatures generally the high teens to low 20s, quite a muggy feel where we do see any sunshine across central and western parts of England and Wales later. On Tuesday, a much calmer picture. High pressure starting to build in as that low pressure moves out of the way. Still fairly unsettled, so a day of sunny spells and scattered showers. Some of the showers on the heavy side. And then it settles down Wednesday into Thursday. Plenty of sunny spells and temperatures starting to rise.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Leo Kearse. Coming up next with the pundits, I wonder what attracted Tony Blair to the oil-rich state of Saudi Arabia. Turns out the Blair Institute kept taking donations from the autocratic regime even after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And do we need a nationwide DNA database for crime? Plus, should Pride events be funded by the taxpayer? Stay tuned for that.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan Tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Back with me now and joining me throughout the show are broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford, the director for the Common Sense Society Emma Webb, and former Labour MP Simon Dangsuk. Anyway, great to have you back. And Sir Tony Blair's Institute continued to advise and receive money from the government of Saudi Arabia, even after the assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey. And that was widely assumed to be okayed by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Blair's Institute has been working with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman since 2017 on a vision to help boost the Saudi state. When the prince approved the murder of Khashoggi in 2018, Blair considered cutting ties with the country and yet looked in his bank account and decided to remain engaged in Saudi Arabia. I wonder why Tony Blair decided to keep in touch with the billionaire, trillionaire, oil-rich state of Saudi Arabia. I mean, what do you make of this? Do you think Tony Blair...
Tony Blair doing something dodgy in the Middle East?
Yeah,
well, I'd never.
In fairness, it's not the worst thing he's done in the Middle East. But yeah, I mean, the Tony Blair Institute, like the Clinton Institute, I mean, they take these vast sums and generate huge amounts of wealth. I mean, the sums we're talking about, some of the salaries at the Blair Institute are £500,000.
The trouble is, he's not the only one. America and Europe did $140 billion worth of trade with Saudi Arabia in 2022. Yeah. And it was things like weapons, it was things like oil. Yeah. We've got the PGA Golf Tour is merging with the Saudi Arabia Live golf tournament. We've got very well-known household names like Cristiano Ronaldo who are now playing there. It isn't just Tony Blair who's noticed that is really where the centre of gravity is turning in terms of Middle Eastern influence. And to be fair, yes, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi was absolutely appalling and should never have been allowed to happen. Yeah. At the same time, MBS, as he's known, is trying to shape or change the sort of social structure of his country and make it more liberal. And yes, Simon, I think he should be encouraged. We should be kind of going into
Simon,
these countries.
I mean, as a former Labour MP, do you think it's better to be sort of involved with the nasty people and try and steer them around?
I agree with Lucy. I think it's better to be inside the tent peeing out rather than outside the tent peeing in. Right. And so I think Blair would argue that he can have more influence by staying in contact with this particular regime. The murder is absolutely awful. But in terms of the money raised as well, a lot is then used by the Institute, the Tony Blair Institute, to do good work in Africa. So it's not all going into Tony Blair's pockets by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of the work they do in Rwanda, in Sierra Leone, all good work by the Tony Blair Institute.
And is it good work, or is it... Because I'm always concerned when charities are doing work in Africa. There's some sort of nefarious intent. I mean, I don't know. I don't trust a man who's trying to do something good.
I'm worried about them taking Tony Blair's advice. I think, I mean, the purpose of the Tony Blair Foundation, and Tony Blair, obviously, unlike other prime ministers who just go on the speaking circuit, they settle down and they write a book and they live a quiet life, he saw it as the sort of trampoline for him to sort of spring himself into, it was a Blairites gone global. Yeah. And that's basically what this organisation does. And so, of course, it has interests in countries all around the world.
But that's not a bad thing.
If you agree,
if you agree with Blair's, I'm not saying he was perfect, but he was one of the better prime ministers that we've had in the last, several years.
We've had devolution, we've had absolutely uncontrolled immigration. I mean, Tony Blair wasn't by any means, a perfect prime minister. We have seen economic growth, but our country is more than an economy.
But who is? But you still have to engage with these countries, and particularly where Saudi Arabia sits geopolitically and the way in which it's trying to reshape itself. Yeah. And I still maintain that it's better to actually be part of that journey for that nation. Yeah. Doing the thing that we can't say.
I agree that it's important to continue to be involved with these countries in the sense of maintaining a relationship with them diplomatically. Yeah. But they're not an arm of the state. This is an organisation. Yeah, exactly. I always think it's quite interesting how sort of two-faced people are when it comes to progressive issues at home
Yeah.
versus what they're willing to compromise when they go to less progressive states in the Middle East, where we'll say, oh, how progressive they are. They allow women to drive.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Anyway, you might have heard the story of Andrew Malkinson, the man who spent 17 years in prison after being wrongfully convicted for rape. It was only when new DNA evidence came to light that Malkinson was found innocent. This has now raised obvious questions about the role that DNA plays in solving crimes. There are tight laws and restrictions around storing and collecting DNA, but should we be moving towards a nationwide DNA database to tackle crime? Or would that be an ethical minefield? I mean, what do you make of that? Because I'm concerned about the sort of civil liberties aspect of our DNA being forcibly taken from us.
There's real issues about Greater Manchester Police in relation to Andrew Malkinson, isn't there, which still have to be answered for sure. In terms of DNA, it's the European Court of Human Rights that has made it more difficult to hold on to DNA now. They say it restricts your privacy rights. So that's why we have a problem in that the police can't contain or retain DNA on as many people as they currently do. I think you could do it more gradually. I think you could collect it almost by stealth, but you couldn't, create a database of 67 million all, in a short timescale. That'd be crazy.
I don't really like the idea of collecting DNA by stealth.
Somebody just literally shoving something in your mouth. I'm just doing this for polling purposes.
There are plenty of companies that people are volunteering there, like people like 23andMe that are obviously creating worldwide databases. So they can even, there have been issues where people have discovered that they, the sperm bank scandals, they discovered that they had hundreds of relatives all around the world that had been taken from one particular sperm bank. So there are companies that are amassing a lot of genetic information. But I'm actually with the European Court of Human Rights on this. I think that this is a violation of privacy. So it's one thing to collect DNA in relation to a particular case in order to use it as evidence in a court to convict or to dismiss evidence. It's another thing to almost treat the entire population as if they are potential criminals and keeping a database on everyone. I think that is a completely gross violation of people's privacy, and I wouldn't consent to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Anyway, the cost of living... yesterday it emerged that taxpayers have paid £500,000 to sponsor Pride events in the UK. I mean, is this good use of taxpayers' money?
No.
No, I don't think so. I think it should be charitable and sponsorship that funds these things.
Yeah, and there's enough corporate sponsors lining up to sponsor Pride events.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coutts Bank being one, having really big banners of rainbows in their front lobby.
Yeah,
but
we're not sure if they'll be able to afford it next year.
This is true. Well, they could ask Nigel, maybe, if he's got a few quid that
I think he'll be banking somewhere else by then.
Some of the things that they spent this money on. So Hounslow Council, Labour-run council, spent 50 grand on a rainbow junction so that you can cross the road in an LGBT-friendly way. Stirling Council spent money on glitter tattoos. And Wolverhampton Council spent money on 3 kilometres of rainbow bunting.
See, this blows my mind when people when people talk about austerity and how terrible things are under the Tory government, and yet somehow public servants have got money to splash everywhere on glitter tattoos.
In the grand scheme of things, £500,000 is not much in terms of the budgets in the public sector.
But it's the tip of the iceberg.
It's our money that could be better spent on families that are homeless and have nowhere to go.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's surely an issue with Pride has sort of changed its meaning. I mean, back, 30 years ago, when gay people were oppressed, it was a rallying call. It was provided visibility. Now, the gay people aren't. That battle's kind of been won largely. And now Pride has sort of metastasised into celebrating kink and also sexualising, providing drag queen events for children.
One of the councils did.
And also, some gays and lesbians have been excluded from Pride events. I mean, in Wales, lesbians were actually booted off the Pride March because trans activists objected to them being there. So, I mean, now that it's become this sort of politicised thing that's got away from just being about lesbian and gay people, do you think it's time for the state to stop funding it?
I think it is more about charitable donations, that actually if people really feel that strongly about it and it's another version, another charity that they want to support, then that should be fine. But if it's taxpayers' money, then that's got to go on areas of the community, could be hospitals, or it could be brightening up your... Maybe what they was thinking was, instead of hanging baskets, which is incredibly twee, maybe we should have rainbow zebra crossings or something.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about what the money could be spent on. The money could just not be taken out of our pockets. Is that, is that a possibility? Can I just keep hold of that money and spend it on some nabwad?
It does make you think that we should have the ability to withhold our tax if they continue to spend it on things like glitter tattoos and drag queen story hours for children under the age of 5, which is one of the things that one of these councils did. Yeah. It's just an outrageous use of public funds, and that it just shows sort of the mentality that they thought that this was acceptable. Yeah. It's all right, if you as an individual want to be part of this, but in the public sector it's become a sort of mandatory thing. Yeah. One of the things that they spent money on were pronoun badges for staff, and presumably any person who said I don't want to wear a pronoun badge would be dismissed and labelled as a bigot.
Oh yeah, they'd be hauled up in front of HR and get a non-crime hate incident recorded on the record. But yeah, Emma's not going to pay her tax because she doesn't agree with what the government spends it on. I can't wait to see how that goes. Anyway, coming up next, my next guest is a conservationist who rewilds lions and tigers. Hopefully, she'll bring one in. Don't go anywhere. We might get to see somebody being eaten. See you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
My next guest is a conservationist who works for the Aspinall Foundation, who specialise in breeding and rewilding endangered species. But don't worry, it's nothing like Tiger King. Freya Aspinall joins me now. Freya, it's great to have you in the studio.
Nice to see you.
I was really hoping you were going to bring a lion in.
Yeah, sadly not.
You're not allowed to bring one on the tube?
No, not yet.
Have you ever... are you actually allowed to carry a lion around with you?
No, nor should I. That's not the point. We've got to keep them as wild as possible. Come on.
Oh, right, of course, because you're rewilding these animals so they can then be released into, hopefully not like Richmond Park. Where are they?
Back to Africa.
Back to Africa,
yeah.
Right. Just on the... You just drive to Africa and drop them off, or do you... Is it
Fly to Africa.
Right.
It's a lot... Oh, it depends. Every animal's different.
Do they get their own seat?
Yeah, well, they have their own crates. But so we have 2 lions right now in Africa, and they went on a plane, but we're going to send back our elephants and 2 jumbo planes, Qatar Airways, back to Africa.
So how do you get... What are the logistics of getting an elephant on a plane?
It's so difficult. I mean, we have such an amazing team who's doing all of this, but, I mean, right now we're feeding the elephants in the crate, so it gets used to coming in, and then one day we'll shut it. But every animal's different. With the gorillas, they just go in. We never try to tranquilise the animal, hopefully.
Yeah. And how did the lions and the elephants end up in your care?
Oh, OK, so this was something that I was born into. So the lions, their mother died of a uterus infection, so me and my dad have to hand-raise them. They'd be dead if we didn't do that. And then as soon as they're old enough, we're going to try and send them back to Africa.
Right, and I think we've got pictures on the screen now. These are the 2 lions, 2 lion cubs. Oh, they're so cute.
They're very
I'm not
sweet.
even a cat person.
I'm allergic to cats.
Well, including
How
these
ironic.
cats?
Yeah, all animals, I'm allergic.
Right, for anybody listening on radio, they are the cutest animals in the world. And here's, are these gorillas?
Those are 2 gorillas we saved from slaughter. They saw their whole family get killed, and we saved them. Our team in the Congo, we protect 1 million acres in Gabon and Congo.
And were they being slaughtered by poachers?
The poachers slaughtered their whole family, and they were taking them in to be as pets, and we saved them. And now they're living it free in the wild.
And so do the poachers go after the gorillas to get the small ones as pets and for zoos?
As pets, I mean, the illegal wildlife trade is the 3rd biggest illegal trade in the world. Bushmeat for gorillas, I mean, you name it.
So people eat the gorillas?
They do, yeah.
They eat the gorillas and also send the baby ones around the world to be exotic pets?
Some zoos will actually take animals from the wild.
Right.
But, you know, there's also ashtrays. They use their hands as ashtrays, their foot as stools, yeah.
And is this one of the biggest threats to endangered species such as gorillas?
I mean, I would say the big is poaching for sure. I mean, every animal's different, but right now I think the biggest threat for animals is that they're stuck in captivity and they're not being sent back to the wild.
Yeah, and how do you sort of rehabilitate and reacclimatise animals to living in the wild? Because it must be nice for the animal getting fed by a bottle and, you know, living a nice life, and then all of a sudden you're thrown back into the wild and, you know...
Yeah, it's a long process. So, as I said, it's a different process for every animal, but... for example, with the gorillas, we have an island in the Congo, so we'll get them used to... We'll feed them every single day, and then slowly we'll reduce their food so they can forage on their own.
Yeah.
They're, like, just on an island to climatise and get used to the diet, and then eventually, once they've settled in, then we'll release them to the wild. But they're still in their natural habitat on an island.
And are you ever tempted to build a little coliseum for those cubs and dress some squirrels up as Christians?
No.
But do you have to give the lions like live food to get them used to?
They've just started eating meat.
Right.
I know. It's like really sweet. I feel like a proud mum.
But is that meat already dead, or do
yeah, it's venison, beef.
Right, great.
I know.
You're eating better than me. Are you going to have to progress to the point where they are actually, you know, running around and bringing something down? Because I guess that's what they're going to have to hunt when they're back in the wild.
Yeah, 100%. Well, actually, a lot of people say that, you know, they won't be able to hunt, they're humanised, they're domesticated, and we've proven them wrong every time. So we're the only people in the world that rewilded cheetah, and when we rewilded our cheetah back to Africa, within the first few hours they hunted immediately.
Amazing.
And so if humans think that an animal who over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution can lose their natural instincts to hunt, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Even now it's embedded in them, the little cubs who are like 8 weeks old.
So that instinct never leaves them. And in fact, we see that sometimes with, I don't know if you're aware of Siegfried and Roy, the Las Vegas magicians, but they were on stage. They had a stage show with these white Siberian tigers. And one of the tigers, they've done this show hundreds of times, when the tigers one day just turned around and attacked Siegfried or Roy, I'm not sure which one.
I'm not a big fan of animal shows.
Right.
So I wouldn't be watching that, but...
It's not a good way to rehabilitate them, because there's no magicians for them to eat in the wild.
All animal shows that should be illegal, that should not be happening. That's crazy.
And zoos, how do you feel about zoos?
Not a fan. Not a fan. There's just a lot of rules and regulations zoos are not following. And obviously we have our 2 sanctuaries here in the UK, but we're really trying to phase out of zoos and kind of lead the path for other people to follow. And zoos are not rewilding their animals, which is a big problem.
And do zoos do anything to help conservation?
No. I mean, they claim to be doing conservation work, but I'll give you some facts here. I mean, 95% of all animals in captivity aren't even critically endangered. Of the 850 mammal species that are in captivity, only 45 are viable to go back to the wild.
Right.
And of that 45, only a handful can go back. The rest are hybridized inbred. So if 95% of animals can go back to the wild, why are they in zoos? How is that conservation work?
Yeah.
The other thing is zoos are spending millions of pounds, all zoos up to billions of pounds, on putting the public first. They don't put the animals first.
They're providing an entertainment experience.
Entertainment.
Well, Freya, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You've been absolutely fantastic. I've learned things about lions and gorillas I never knew. Anyway, join us soon for the rest of the show.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain coming up through the next 24 hours, could be heavy at times, but the good news is that it does start to turn drier by the middle of the week. Low pressure in charge at the moment, but that moves out the way as we head towards Wednesday and high pressure replaces it, settling our weather down. This evening we have outbreaks of heavy rain pushing in across the West Country, Wales, spreading north and eastwards as we move through into the early hours. This turning heavy at times over parts of northern Wales, northern England and Met Office warning in force here. Clearer skies for Northern Ireland, Scotland, some showery rain in places and temperatures generally remaining in double figures. So wet start across England and Wales Monday morning. Heavy rain across Transpennines routes in particular if you're travelling here. Rain heavy as well across parts of Wales, just slowly pushing eastwards through the day. Sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Again, some of these heavy at times too. And temperatures generally the high teens to low 20s, quite a muggy feel where we do see any sunshine across central and western parts of England and Wales later. On Tuesday, a much calmer picture. High pressure starting to build in as that low pressure moves out of the way. Still fairly unsettled, so a day of sunny spells and scattered showers. Some of the showers on the heavy side. And then it settles down Wednesday into Thursday. Plenty of sunny spells and temperatures starting to rise.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world, even on Mars. This is Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Leo Kearse. In my take at 10, how have we got to the place where the NHS is unable to say the word woman? And tonight's newsmaker is Anne Widdecombe. We'll be getting into whether the Tories are in danger of being seen as the nasty party again. And Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages from exactly 10:30 p.m. sharp. So, a busy hour to come, so put something cold and fizzy in the fridge or fire up the kettle and let's make a night of it. First, the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
A very good evening to you from the GB newsroom. The government is facing renewed pressure to tackle migrant crossings in the Channel after 6 people died when their vessel sank yesterday. 509 people crossed the English Channel in 10 small boats on Saturday, bringing the total for the year to more than 16,500. The Home Office says stopping the boats is one of their top priorities. Campaign groups have described the deaths as appalling and preventable. The victims of the worst single atrocity in Northern Ireland's history have been remembered during a poignant memorial service. Families of the 29 people killed in the 1998 dissident Republican bombing in Omagh were amongst those who gathered in County Tyrone ahead of the 25th anniversary. Michael Gallagher, whose son Aidan was amongst those killed, described it as powerful testimony to community spirit and cohesion 25 years after our small town was ripped apart. The anniversary is on Tuesday. No one has been criminally convicted of carrying out the attack. The search for victims of the wildfires in Hawaii is continuing, but questions are being asked about the state's response. At least 93 people have died on the island of Maui, but the state's governor says that will rise significantly as up to 1,000 people remain unaccounted for. One local restaurant owner has questioned the speed of the response on social media. She said this: "We're 100 miles from the largest military in the world. 72 hours later, where is the Navy, the hospital ship, the helicopters, the natural disaster relief infrastructure that should have been here by now?" Pubs in England and Wales will be allowed to continue selling takeaway pints after the government decided to keep COVID licensing rules. They were due to expire in September, but it's understood the Prime Minister has listened to the industry loud and clear. Pubs have been struggling to recover from the pandemic because of rising energy prices. Mark Zuckerberg's dismissed a potential cage fight with Elon Musk, claiming the Tesla founder isn't serious. The rival billionaires appeared to agree to a fight in June when Mr Musk tweeted he was up for it. Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Meta, which includes Facebook and Instagram, and he also trains in mixed martial arts, replied, "Send me the location." The CEO of X, formerly known as Twitter, responded Vegas Octagon, but Elon Musk has since pulled back, citing injury concerns. And the long-awaited British summer could make an appearance later this week with temperatures of up to 30 degrees forecast. However, a yellow rain warning is in place for northern England and Wales tomorrow, and there are risks of flooding and disruption. But once that subsides, temperatures are due to soar, which could make the UK hotter than parts of California. This is GB News. We'll have more in about an hour's time, but now it is back to Leo.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight, and let's have a look at some of your emails which have been coming in thick and fast, mostly about the grouse shooting, which has turned out to be quite a controversial topic. Richard says, Leo, it is blasting birds out of the sky for fun! Exclamation mark. It's a barbaric and knuckle-dragging weekend hobby of the toffee-nosed landed gentry who spend the weekdays fast asleep in the House of Lords. I don't think everybody that goes grouse shooting is necessarily a member of the House of Lords. Some impassioned opinions there. Michael says the panel are talking rubbish. Sorry, his words, not mine. The estates kill all the animals and birds that could kill the grouse chicks. That's not true. I mean, there are some raptors killed on grouse moors, but it's illegal and it's rightly punished very strongly when it does happen. Anyway, still to come, we've got the Newsmaker with Anne Widdecombe. We'll be getting into whether the Tories risk being seen as the nasty party again. And at 10:30 p.m. sharpish, we'll be getting tomorrow's papers hot off the press. Plus, we'll have tonight's headline heroes and back page zeros. Big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. Here is my Take at 10. The latest NHS word for women arrived this week. A form at a hospital in London referred to women as patients of childbearing potential. I can't imagine how a woman handed this form would feel, but maybe they're used to it by now. We've seen women steadily erased from NHS literature. They're referred to as people who have a cervix, people assigned female at birth, patients of childbearing age, people who know they are pregnant, anything basically except the one term that everyone knows and understands: women. The NHS has reduced women to a set of biological components and functions. Vaginal birth is now called frontal birth. A frontal birth sounds like something on a cruise ship. Maternity services are now called perinatal services. Perinatal sounds like something you'd get in Nando's. The vagina is now called the bonus hole. Surely if any hole is a bonus hole, it's the bum hole. Breast milk is now called milk from the chest, and breastfeeding is called chest feeding. And men don't escape either. Instead of father, they say second biological parent. All of this is so unnecessary. It's done to avoid causing offence to trans men. That's people who are born female and then decide to identify as men. But they make up a tiny fraction of the population. And why would the words woman or breast be offensive to them? When it comes to healthcare, trans men know that they have female anatomy and they know that words like vagina relate to them. I've never heard of a single trans man complaining that the word breastfeeding gives them a panic attack or they can't access NHS services because of the word mother. Why are we upending our entire dictionary to avoid causing imaginary offence to imaginary people? And what about the feelings of women who don't get to be referred to as women anymore, but instead are categorised as people of childbearing potential? Look, we should all try to be polite to people who identify as another gender and use their preferred pronouns, but what about the people who actually are that gender? Don't they get to be referred to as women instead of ovary carriers? And it's dangerous to use these convoluted euphemistic terms instead of words that everyone understands. Some women haven't done a joint honours in medicine and gender studies and don't know what a person in ownership of a cervix means. And the NHS treats a lot of women who don't speak English as a first language. Woman is a universally recognised term. Patients of childbearing potential sounds like a 90s indie band. The gender ideologists who run the NHS can stick these euphemisms for women right up their bonus hole. Anyway, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Email in to gbviews@gbnews.com and I'll get to your emails after the break. Reacting to my Take at 10 are former Labour MP Simon Dankzuk, Director for the Common Sense Society Emma Webb, and broadcaster and psychotherapist Lucy Beresford. Coming up, we've got the papers at 10:30 p.m. sharp with full panel reaction. But let's first talk to you about these euphemisms that the NHS are using.
Well, I've worked clinically with individuals who either are transitioning or have transitioned, and they find these new terms really offensive because they feel that it others them, that it's something that's being introduced in order to highlight the fact that they're different, whereas the one thing they want to do is to blend in, is to not feel different. They've spent their whole lives feeling in the wrong body or feeling that they haven't been seen as who they really are, and now they finally are, and then they go into a situation, a medical setting, where actually the very people who they thought would give them understanding and insights are actually the people who are giving them these very strange labels.
So these terms that we're being told are there to help trans people feel included
it's totally
are actually alienating trans people and actually making them feel othered. I mean, that's
well,
incredible.
I mean, if you want to use their own language, I mean, how much more othering can you get than reducing somebody to their biological parts and dehumanising them in that way?
Yeah.
So that they, even things like, you know, if we try to apply their sort of like criticising everything and tearing it apart, even the term bonus hole makes it sound like it's some kind of add-on, which they would say makes men sort of normative. It's making men the model, and then there's the bonus hole, the additional thing.
And also bonus hole, it sounds like a bell should go off and a pound coin should fall out the bum.
It's the same thing with saying second biological parent. Makes it sound like, oh, but it's the woman is the first. Now, I don't actually believe this, but if you're just applying their own logic to it, and then even to say that a woman is a person who has childbearing potential. There are lots of women who have gone through the menopause or for whatever reason can't have children. Imagine being a woman who can't have children, looking at a form that defines what a woman is by childbearing potential. You know that that's what it's referring to. You know it means woman, but it's making you feel less of a woman because you can't have children when you might want to. The whole thing is so insulting and dehumanising. And even though you mentioned that sometimes men do get a bit of this, it's almost always women. They're always going for basically deconstructing women.
But it really calls into question the people who are responsible for this. Should they be running public services? It's a very serious question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anybody who can get to this conclusion in an organisation who are setting a culture which is bizarre and to the vast majority of the people watching this programme think is madness, should not be anywhere near delivering public services. The view would be just get on with doing the day job. We've got the NHS in quite a state and they're focusing on stuff like this. Get on with treating patients. That's the priority. Nothing else. No culture wars, just that.
And what do you think's behind this? I mean, we've seen diversity, equity and inclusion come into pretty much all organisations, private sector and public sector.
Well, they want to be seen to be sensitive, but in fact, the actual opposite is coming across because they come across as insensitive to all categories of people, because it's offending the people who have either transitioned or are transitioning. And it certainly offends, as Emma said, the very women who are perhaps availing themselves of these services, whatever the medical treatment might be, but sometimes they're actually insensitively highlighting things that might be not possible for some of those women.
Yeah, and Simon, I mean, have you seen many ructions in the Labour Party over this? Because I mean, it seems there are elements in the Labour Party who are pulling in the direction of gender ideology and other elements that are pulling back.
Yeah, real tensions within the Labour Party there, and Keir Starmer's only just flip-flopped on this, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He was struggling to define what a woman was until a few weeks ago, and now he's decided what one is and knows how to describe one. This is how desperate he is to win the next general election.
I think he had to run it past a few focus groups before he worked out what a woman was.
Yeah, quite possibly, because he knows it's a vote loser.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. And what he was initially trying to do is to appeal to a very small section of society in terms of these issues. It's not. There's no votes to be won by appealing to this very small section.
That's right. There was a brilliant poll in the Mail on Sunday today, and it identified all the key issues that people are concerned about. And gender and identity issues was second bottom, with about 1.5% of people thinking that it's relevant, with cost of living at 69%.
Yeah. And why do you think the gender ideologies have so much power and so much influence? Do you think there are special advisors close to governments? Do you think it's just the case that, when people get disinterested in government, it allows people with quite esoteric interests to get closer and influence government?
I think you're seeing it across all of our different institutions. So we've seen it with the police, we've seen it with the public sector, as we were just discussing, spending so much money on Pride Month. It's across the public sector, but it's also across the private sector as well. And so I think a lot of it has to do with there are certain organisations that lobby the public and private sector, provide them with forms of accreditation. We saw it this week, reported by GB News Investigates, that B Corp, ESG...
Yeah. And that was relating to the debanking scandal.
Yeah.
We've seen with the gender stuff in corporations, Stonewall provide all this advice, and it's basically to get the badge. It's like a protection racket, a mafia protection racket.
But that's the problem. There's a
Church of England, all of them signed up to this.
People are mistaking noise for volume. That actually there are a lot of noise around here, a lot of white noise around the topic, and people think, particularly maybe politicians say, oh, we better pay attention, we better do something about it. But actually, no, people are really not bothered by that. They just want other people to live and let live in the same way as that's what you want for yourself. And people are tolerant, by and large.
Yeah.
And politicians are almost infantilizing us to imagine that we can't appreciate the beauty of the difference of people.
Yeah.
And I think some of it is that it makes them feel that they have a purpose.
Right.
I think that we're living in a kind of void of meaning, and so there are some people who find purpose in promoting these things. There's almost a kind of like religiosity to it. And also probably in the workplace, maybe there are some people for whom it's as simple as it's just fun to spend money on glitter tattoos, whereas actually doing your job is in administration and bureaucracy is maybe a little bit less fun. So I think it's this kind of like general shift that we have towards this managerial society.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that there's a concerted effort on the part of a lot of people to try and push this.
And just briefly, in terms of politicians, some are afraid of being on the wrong side of history.
Right.
So that they might be seen as what at one time they would have been homophobic if they'd been opposed to, you know, to gay people getting rights and things.
Yeah.
And so there's this worry about being on the wrong side of history, and I think that's captured some people's attention, and we've gone down a road that we're struggling to get back from.
I mean, do you think there's an element of classism in this as well? Because it's almost like a new language is being developed, and unless you have the time and the energy and the resources to research all this and read The Guardian cover to cover every day and do the right university courses at the right university, then you're not going to know the correct terms, which change every 2 weeks. And we see it with not just with gender, but with the race. That, you know, black people have to be referred to as BAME, and then BIPOC, and then global majority, and I mean, it's almost to sort of exclude people who...
It's elitist and exclusive. Ironically. They are the very thing that they accuse everybody else of. But it is this, the language they use is a very closed system that you learn from doing things like gender studies at university. And this is a point that you made about, you know, signing in the forms, that whether English is your second language or not, this is like learning a whole other language. And so people who are not university graduates or who don't buy into that, who just speak plainly and with common sense, will find themselves falling foul of it just because they're not using the right turns of phrases that are not used to really communicate anything. They're used to signal that you're part of an in-group.
Yeah.
And if you don't use that language, you're not part of the in-group, and then you'll find yourself possibly debanked.
Yeah, good analysis. You go back to Rochdale, Burnley, where I'm from, people look at you blankly and going, what is this conversation about? They have absolutely zero interest in it whatsoever.
Yeah, so it's a small but very vocal minority of people on I guess, Twitter and some other places that are creating a lot of noise that's steering a lot of very real government policy that's making its way through to, you know, in the public sector and through to private companies as well, through diversity, equity and inclusion. But in reality, it's just that tiny fraction of people who are rattling.
Who are jumping up and down and making lots of noise.
Yeah.
But it's also the financial incentives. So the fact that you can get accredited for incorporating environmental, social and governance into your, whether it's public or private sector, the fact that even the Church of England commissioners who handle the investments for the Church of England are signed up to the UN's Principles for Responsible Investment, which incorporates ESG.
Is being responsible.
So no surprise that they are so keen on reaching net zero, because this is something that is obviously on their agenda.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the Church, because when a lot of this seems like a new religion with its new rules to be followed, but with very little actual practical use. Anyway, coming up, we've got the papers at 10:30pm sharp with a full panel reaction. But next, tonight's newsmaker is Anne Widdecombe. See you in a couple of minutes.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Leo Kearse. Let's have a couple of your emails. So Stephen says, I go to the Pride Parade in Birmingham, which is a morning, early afternoon event. But like many gay people, I've long stopped going to the second part of the event where you have to buy a very expensive ticket to attend all the concerts and bars, etc. So no nonsense thing about Pride there. Moira says that she's very angry at all this nonsense by the NHS. How much of the NHS money is being wasted on these gender identity issues? Quite right, Moira. They need to focus on clearing the waiting lists. And, I've got massive support for the NHS and the people doing their jobs, and I wish they weren't getting distracted with gender ideology nonsense. Stella says that these terms are disgusting and insulting to women. And Lee says the quickest way to equality is to de-label people. But it seems to be all about labelling people these days, and you have to treat these people this way and those people that way, which is the opposite of equality. Quite right there. Anyway, it's time now for the Newsmaker, in which a fearless commentator speaks out on the big stories of the day. And tonight's Newsmaker is former Conservative Minister Anne Widdecombe. Now, it was reported today that senior Conservatives are concerned that they will be once again branded the Nasty Party following the latest news on migrant crossings. There is also a growing number of Tory ministers apparently backing plans to quit the European Convention on Human Rights. So, are the Conservatives just plain nasty with no regard for human rights? Good evening, Anne. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
And what do you make of this? Are the Tories really the nasty party?
No, of course they're not. I mean, that was a phrase used by the former and unlamented Prime Minister, Theresa May, when the Conservatives were in opposition, and she thought that that was a way of currying favour. The Tory party has never been the nasty party, but what it has always been is the divided party. And those divisions are now really coming to the fore. There is a section of the party that is in tune with public opinion, which knows that people want the migrant crisis solved, and if that means coming out of ECHR, then so be it. If that is the answer to stopping the boats, then so be it. And there is nothing nasty, whatever, about trying to stop people entering a highly dangerous situation for no good reason other than the profit of the people who are making money out of this. And people are drowning. At the very best, they have a terrible journey. They come here. They are not immediately given British citizenship and given a job and all the rest of it. You know, the streets of London are not paved with gold. Now, there's nothing nasty about wanting to stop that. There's nothing nasty about wanting to stop the sheer pressure that all this is putting on schools, on transport, on health services. There's nothing nasty about that. But there has always been a section of the Tory party that wants to be Lib Dem. And they are the people that we are now hearing from. So my message to the Tory party is fine. By all means, give up trying to solve the immigration problem. By all means, ditch any thought of coming out of ECHR, and Reform UK will do it all for you, mate.
But, Anne, don't you think, I mean, you talk about the people wanting the migrant crisis to be resolved, but some people disagree. And when people like Lee Anderson, politicians like Lee Anderson, come out and use quite brutal language, that's maybe got some ugly connotations if you go back a few decades. I mean, I love Lee Anderson myself. I think he's blunt, he's tough talking, but I just think language like, you know, they should F off back to France, it's going to turn people away and push people away when you really want to bring people on board and support the efforts to solve the migrant crisis.
Well, actually, I disagree. I think that probably a large proportion of the population thought, thank heavens for that, when Lee Anderson said what they've been thinking for a very long time. Now, I wouldn't have used the verb in question, as I said earlier on this week on GB News. I wouldn't have used that verb. But the sentiment, which is France is a perfectly safe country, you know, they have chosen to leave that safe country. They have chosen not to apply for asylum there, but to try to get illegally into this country. And then they have the gall to complain about the fact that everything isn't to their satisfaction. Well, I think it's quite right to say, and I would probably phrase it, buzz off back to France.
And do you think this problem can be resolved without leaving the ECHR?
It's difficult to see how. Now, it is a fact that an awful lot of countries simply don't comply with rulings from the ECHR. And we Britain, have a very, very good reputation for abiding by rulings. We're one of the highest % of rulings that are actually observed by Britain. So, you know, we could say, well, we're staying ECHR, but we're not going to take a blind bit of notice of this. And if you want to complain about that, well, look at Germany's record of complying with rulings. You know, look at some other countries' records. Well, fine, you know, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for Britain. We don't actually like your ruling. We're not going to comply with it. Now, that is another option, and it's less drastic than coming out altogether.
Well, that is an option that we could look at. I love the idea of Anne Widdecombe telling Britain to break the law. Anne, it's great to talk to you tonight. Thanks for joining us. And coming up, we've got the papers at 10:30 p.m. sharp with full panel reaction, plus tonight's headline heroes and backpage zeros. And I want to know yours. Send them in to gbviews@gbnews.com and we'll get to them shortly. See you after the break.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain coming up through the next 24 hours, could be heavy at times, but the good news is that it does start to turn drier by the middle of the week. Low pressure in charge at the moment, but that moves out the way as we head towards Wednesday and high pressure replaces it, settling our weather down. This evening we have outbreaks of heavy rain pushing in across the West Country Wales, spreading north and eastwards as we move through into the early hours. This turning heavy at times over parts of northern Wales, northern England, and Met Office warning in force here. Clearer skies for Northern Ireland, Scotland, some showery rain in places, and temperatures generally remaining in double figures. So wet start across England and Wales Monday morning. Heavy rain across Transpennines routes in particular if you're travelling here. Rain heavy as well across parts of Wales, just slowly pushing eastwards through the day. Sunshine and showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Again, some of these heavy at times too. And temperatures generally the high teens to low 20s, quite a muggy feel where we do see any sunshine across central and western parts of England and Wales later. On Tuesday, a much calmer picture, high pressure starting to build in as that low pressure moves out of the way. Still fairly unsettled, so a day of sunny spells and scattered showers, some of the showers on the heavy side, and then it settles down Wednesday into Thursday. Plenty of sunny spells and temperatures starting to rise.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:30 p.m. So it's a time for a look at tomorrow morning's newspapers, hot off the press. Let's have a look at those. Actually, before we have a look at those, let's just have a quick look at some of your emails. So Kathy says, have I missed something? Who on earth would take gender studies at university? OK. Maybe it wasn't worth going back to that, but thank you for sending that in, Kathy. Anyway, we've got the Independent here with scandal of renters left facing deadly hazards in homes. 1 in 8 families live with life-threatening issues such as structural flaws and fire risks as landlords profiteer from unsafe housing. Well, if we built more houses, there wouldn't be such an imbalance in the market and they wouldn't be able to profiteer. Tent crash, the Metro leads with tent crash baby in miracle escape. That was that horrifying crash at a campsite in Wales. Good to hear that a baby escaped. The Eye leads with surprise hike to inflation next month will boost state pension. Good news for people who get that. I'm still a few years off. The Daily Mail has patients trying to escape Labour's Welsh NHS. Apparently, soaring numbers of patients from Wales are seeking care in English hospitals to escape the longer waiting lists under the Labour-run Welsh NHS. So devolution hasn't just been a disaster in Scotland then. The Guardian leads with lower income pupils expected to be hit hardest by grade deflation. They also have a picture there of somebody clearing mines in the Donetsk area in Ukraine. They say they're desperate for help in clearing mines. They're up to 5 mines per square metre. So fingers crossed they can fix that. And the land can become habitable again. The Sun leads with Kane could play for Germany. There's a bit of a caveat there. It's his son. If Harry Kane's son is born in Munich, then, of course, he could play for Germany. The Daily Express has some good news for a change. Brexit boost bringing business back to Britain. A lot of B's there. I like that. And the Daily Star, finally, has We're Made for It. The summer saved Brits to fry in 31 degrees French frazzle. I like that. So somebody's happy about hotter weather instead of saying the planet is burning. That's nice to see. But yeah, let's go back to that Brexit Britain. Brexit boost bringing business back to Britain. So firms are benefiting from Brexit by bringing their business, the production of goods back into the UK. I don't know if it's their supply chains are just too complicated when they've got to have production outside the UK. But we've seen a few good news stories about Brexit. We always knew that Brexit was going to be an initial hit on the economy, but then long term it could reap dividends as we sort of enjoy a bit of Singaporean freedom. I mean, this is some good news, surely, Emma.
Yeah, I think, often I get people saying, well, surely you think that the Brexit vote was a mistake because we haven't suddenly reached the sunlit uplands. Well, the people who tried to thwart Brexit are still the people who are running the country.
Yeah.
There are still a lot of them in the House of Commons. Things weren't going to turn around overnight. Brexit was a vote in principle to get our sovereignty back. That was what it was about. So whatever the consequence is, if we screw it up, at least it's us who screwed it up rather than us handing our power over to another entity that can push us around. So I think, any good news like this, it's nice to see something other than, usually you see everything being blamed on Brexit, even if it's only a very tenuous link.
Yeah.
And of course, because of the pandemic, it's sort of Schrodinger's Brexit. We don't know what could have happened if that hadn't have immediately followed. So obviously this is wonderful news, and I think that the EU is increasingly becoming, as many of us predicted, an unfriendly place for business.
Although, saying that, it looks like the EU, or many countries in the EU, are actually drawing closer to the UK. I think in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, there was a need for the EU to be seen as almost punishing Britain for leaving, to dissuade others from leaving as well. But now that that's happened, and now we've seen there's actually countries worse than Britain on the edges of Europe, invading Europe. Now people are a bit warmer to Britain.
Yeah, I'd been a Remainer in the referendum, but as soon as the decision result was taken and a majority of the country wanted to leave the EU, then I got fully behind it. That's democracy.
Yeah.
It is good news. I think it shows how resilient Britain actually is as a nation. I think we're, and especially this is talking about manufacturing, which we've always been very strong at, some growth and stronger resilience in terms of manufacturing, I think would be most welcome in the UK.
Yeah, fantastic. And the Daily Mail has patients trying to escape Labour's Welsh NHS. So apparently, even the waiting lists are apparently really long in England. They're longer in Wales. I mean, is this another example of devolution failing?
You know what I think? You get commentators trying to guess what a Labour government will be like. Well, the short answer to that is look at devolution, whether it's Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, Labour in Wales, and there's a number of failures in terms of devolution and how Labour in local government or at these devolved levels are actually performing. You know, they wanted devolution in Wales and take responsibility for their own decisions and look at the consequences of that. So it does call into question Labour's ability to govern.
It says, and they're really big figures. You know, it's 1 in 5 in Wales are actually on some form of waiting list, whereas it's, and I'm going to say only 13%, but that's even still a shocking statistic. Yeah. But 1 in 5 is pretty soul-destroying if you're the one waiting for your hip replacement or your knee operation. Yeah. So no wonder they've been crossing the theoretical border to come into England.
It says the number of people who are seeking care in English hospitals to avoid the wait has risen by 40% in the last 2 years.
Wow.
I mean, that's huge. And if you lived on the border of Wales and you can easily cross into England. I mean, it shouldn't be that, you know, with healthcare, I keep saying over and over again that, you know, now we have a universal lack of healthcare. If we don't solve this problem, there are people in the country who can't get to see a dentist. Yeah. And yet, you know, resources seem to be a sort of postcode lottery. So I think you're right. You know, if anybody's wondering what a Labour government might look like, then you just have to look at this kind of mismanagement, because if that's the whole country, there's going to be nowhere to run to.
Although, I mean, is that completely fair? Because when we look at devolved parliaments, they're subject to nowhere near the amount of scrutiny that the Westminster is. So I think Westminster, even though it seems like it doesn't, it does operate at a higher standard.
Scrutiny from who, though? What kind of difference do you get between the opposition?
There's people standing across the floor, you know, scrutinising every piece of policy and holding people's feet at the fire. Or they're supposed to, anyway. I mean, the way the country's going, I'm not sure it's happening. I mean, we can see the picture in The Guardian there of somebody clearing mines in Ukraine. I mean, it looks like the Ukrainian counter-offensive is stalled. Some people have said that this is because the West was too slow in delivering weaponry to Ukraine, so Russia had time to fortify and lay mines and tank traps. So then, you know, when Ukraine did get the tanks, they couldn't just roll down and have that, you know, that fast recapturing of land that we saw in the north.
There was a little worry that there was, in a way, too much Ukraine fatigue, that actually the countries in the West weren't as galvanised. And maybe, well, we knew it was always going to be quite a long game, but if you're the country that's having to put out those ammunitions, then we would be saying, what's the return on investment? And Zelensky, in a way, has been going on a big PR initiative around the world, whether it's America, Saudi Arabia, going to many of the European capitals to say, look, don't forget about us. Yeah. It was definitely 2022's news, but photos of what's happening in Ukraine are few and far between on the front pages nowadays.
It's no longer shocking, I think, as well. Like at the beginning, I think, seeing photographs like that in Europe, not for the first time since the Second World War, but such graphic images like that, bringing back people's memories of that, whether it's memories of their own or memories of their grandparents. And I think people became so desensitised to the constant round-the-clock footage that now we see these images and, you know, not particularly surprised by them, possibly because we've become fatigued. Yeah. But it's interesting, this article says that Ukraine is now the most heavily mined country on earth. Yeah.
I mean, the entirety of, you know, Russia's military might, or we used to assume it was might, it turns out to not be as effective as we once thought. But yeah, the amount of munitions and cluster bombs and mines that they've laid in Ukraine and anti-personnel traps, it's incredible. And they're obviously going to need, you know, assuming Ukraine does liberate the land, they're going to need help for years to come in clearing that. We're also seeing on The Independent the scandal of renters left facing deadly hazards in homes. I mean, is this just the natural result of the housing market and the fact that, there aren't enough homes, so landlords can basically operate how they want?
I think it is a case of that. There's a real shortage, isn't there? We aren't building anywhere near enough houses. There's no doubt about that. And some of these problems will also occur in social housing, as well as, this is talking about the private rented sector, but it will just apply just as much to the to social landlords as well, housing associations, local authorities that have housing. And the conditions in many houses, properties, are really low.
Yeah, so we need more houses and fewer people because, the people coming across the channel, they're not bringing a house with them. Anyway, coming up, we have the Times newspaper after the break, plus tonight's headline heroes and backpage zeros. And I want to know yours. Send them into gbviews@gbnews.com. See you in a couple of minutes.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight. With me tonight are Simon Danksuck, Emma Webb and Lucy Beresford, and we have the Times now. And they lead with shots fired in migrant clash before vessel sank. I mean, this is an incredible story. They say gunfire and clashes involving migrants desperate to get to Britain broke out in Dunkirk in the hours before a small boat sank in the Channel, killing 6 people, witnesses said yesterday. So chaos spread through the camp on Friday as migrants prepared to board boats laid on by smuggling gangs despite choppy waters and high winds, which then proved deadly. I mean, it sounds from reading this as though this precipitated the chaos, the gunfire at the camp precipitated them going into the boats before they're ready. Some of the boats were overladen with people. One of them was overburdened by 65. Overloaded by 65 people, which, then in the rush to get across the Channel, sadly they might not have taken as much care and attention as they would have.
Sounds like a panic. They just all of this chaos was happening, and they headed to the waters despite the fact that it was too choppy for them to go.
Yeah.
It also tells us we have to break the criminal people smugglers gangs business model, because that's what's driving this. It involves firearms. It's a significant part of criminal activity. And credit to the government, the Rwandan policy, which I support, is about breaking the business model. Making it less attractive for people to come here is about breaking the business model. And if it means turning the boats back, then that's what needs to be done. And if that means leaving the European Court of Human Rights, then that's what should be done. And there will be only one people to blame on this. It's those on the left, far left in politics, who've been denying this is an issue all along. We ultimately have to take the right action to deter what's currently going on. People dying as well.
Yeah, I mean, it seems disgusting that people are stymieing the government's efforts to stop these boats crossing while people are dying.
And painting it as if it's the government who are the ones who are being immoral and insensitive. And they've now made this deal with the Turkish, which will share intelligence and personnel and resources to try and get as close to the source as possible of where the dinghies are coming from, to try and sort of disrupt the supply chains, because a lot has to go in to all of the various stages before you've managed to smuggle the people to Calais and all of the equipment in order to get them across the channel. So this is quite a sort of like complicated, sophisticated outfit that they've got going on. But I think now people are feeling so disheartened by repeated government failures. I don't think, given the legal situation, given the activist lawyers who will do anything that they can to, get people to sort of game the system, I don't think there's much you can do unless you do something like leaving.
But the problem is that
human rights.
it isn't actually just about what the British government can do, because so much of this, people are coming from Tunisia and Libya, and they're going to Italy, they're going to Greece. There's a comment in this particular article on the front page of the Times talking about how the French authorities seem to be incredibly slow at rescuing the people who'd gone into the choppy waters.
For the British
for the RNLI to come along. But actually, I don't really hear politicians being honest about the fact that this isn't just a British problem. This is certainly a European problem, if not a global problem, and therefore there needs to be a coordinated response.
Well, let's...
Sorry, but if you look at Labour's solution to this, they have a 5-point plan, which makes no sense at all. Do a new deal with France, give more money in international aid. I mean, that's not going to solve the problem.
They'd probably handle that worse than the NHS.
Anyway, it's time now for headline heroes and back page zeros. Emma, who's your headline hero?
He's a musician whose name is Oliver Anthony, and some people will have heard of him if they're on Twitter or any other social media.
We can see a picture of him there. He's got a magnificent ginger beard.
He's become an almost overnight sensation. He's a factory worker from Virginia who has written and performed this song, Rich Men North of Richmond, and it is one of the best pieces of music that I've heard in a long time. This guy is absolutely phenomenal. It's real music. It comes from the heart and it's connected with people. And he's become this sensation. He's reached the top of the iTunes chart in the United States. And he is being labelled by magazines like the Rolling Stones magazine and the media establishment as being, no surprise, right-wing, presumably just because he is a blue-collar worker from the wrong part of the country, working-class guy who's singing about working-class problems. And the music elite in Rolling Stones magazine is trying to associate him with the right wing, saying that he's become the hero of right-wing.
I think now when we see the words right-wing or far-right extremist, we just assume it's probably somebody off Mumsnet.
But it's bizarre that a working-class guy would be labelled in this way by the left.
My hero is Lee Anderson MP for saying it how it should be said, really. If you don't like the barges, if illegal immigrants don't like the barge accommodation, go back to France.
Right, so he's vocalising what a lot of people are thinking. And Lucy, who's your headline hero?
It's the Lionesses. So we had a very tense match yesterday.
Oh, the football,
in the women's,
not Freya's Cubs.
Not the Aspinall Rescue Lions, although that would be beautiful as well. No, this is the women's football team. We're now through to the semi-final, which will be played on Wednesday. We're playing Australia, which is the only team that has beaten us while we've been coached by Serena Wiegman. Tweakman. So,
really?
Yeah, the omens are, well, we've had some injuries and one of our key players is on a match suspension. So, yeah, if we get through this, it's going to be absolutely phenomenal.
OK, great.
Phenomenal.
Emma, who's your back page zero?
How bad is it that I didn't know that we were even playing football? My back page zero are the eco-zealots who slashed the tyres of the anti-ULEZ campaigners. So there was an anti-ULEZ protest and eco-protesters slashed their tyres. Well, someone slashed their tyres, presumably in objection to them being against ULEZ.
That's going to lead to more emissions because they're going to have to replace the tyres. Simon, who's your back page?
The Home Office civil servants who couldn't get the Bibi Stockholm barge prepared in time and safe and ready for action.
Yeah, quite right. And Lucy?
Robbie Williams, singer, who has decided that he wants to not grow old gracefully, but he's going to submit to tweakments. Now, these are non-invasive sort of, it's not plastic surgery, it's the things that you would do having sort of facial massages and things, but he wants to have a lift under the eyes. And I look at him and I think, oh, he's quite a handsome guy anyway. Yeah. Just grow old gracefully. You don't need to indulge in these things.
Don't men look better with a few grizzled, wrinkles, character
exactly.
in there? And yeah, but I guess he's living up to his. Thank you very much. I'm 27. I'm the oldest Scotsman that has ever lived. But I mean, Robbie Williams, he said in his song, what did he say? I want to get old before I die. Hope I'm old before I die. So maybe he's just living out that, Lucy.
Yeah. Well, just don't indulge a sort of industry that I have concerns about more generally in terms of particularly young girls who are influenced and see perfection on things like Instagram and TikTok and think, oh, well, I can have these little tweakments.
So you're worried that there's going to be some 45-year-old men out there who are going to be like, well, Robbie Williams has had this done. I mean, Simon, would you ever consider?
No, I don't think I would consider it. I'm just going to grow the beard bigger and bigger, I think. Look like the singer.
Yeah. I don't know. I might be tempted. I might take another trip to Turkey, see what they can straighten out and tweak. Get some tweakments, some bags lifted under my eyes. Anyway, thank you for watching Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Leo Kearse. If you want to see more of the headlines, we've looked at the front pages, but Headliners is up next, and they take a deep dive into the newspapers with 3 comedians. So that's the next hour, and it's repeated at 5 in the morning. But thank you so much for joining me, filling in for Mark Dolan. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've been joined by Emma Webb, Simon Dangstock, and Lucy Beresford. Good night.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain coming up through the next 24 hours, could be heavy at times, but the good news is that it does start to turn drier by the middle of the week. Low pressure in charge at the moment, but that moves out the way as we head towards Wednesday and high pressure replaces it, settling our weather down. This evening we have outbreaks of heavy rain pushing in across the West Country, Wales, spreading north and eastwards as we move through into the early hours. This turning heavy at times over parts of northern Wales, northern England, and Met Office warning in force here. Clearer skies